Hello everyone, and welcome to the Magnus Archives, episode 11, my personal favorite episodes of season 1. It's called Dreamer, and he put a fake name, but his name was Antonio Blake, March 14th of 2014. This has to be one of my all-time favorite episodes, 100%. Now, let's talk about Antonio. So Antonio actually lied to get his statement into the Institute because it was too serious for anyone to ever know. What some backstory that he did share with us is that he did live in London and he went to the School of Economics as well. So he looks at himself to be quite credible. But then he starts to get into the singular dreams that he's been having. And he's not a person for vivid dreaming, and this has just started recently for him, at least recently in the realm of when he took the statement. So now we're going to get into the different dreams. So in this dream, he's on the very edge of Canary Wharf, and he just feels this light like coming on him. It feels like it's boiling him basically, and he is kind of just looking down at everything, and as he's looking down at everything, there's like a whole bunch of tendrils and everything. And if you don't know what tendrils means, of course I'm gonna put up a photo, but there's a whole bunch of like thick like webs. Some of them are thin, but they're covering a good decent part of the city. And so of course with dream logic, literally he ended up falling off of it, and by it I do mean the roof. But of course he felt the pain, but he felt what pain should have felt like. So again, dream logic, you feel the pain, but you're not really in pain. Now, Antonio was basically walking around this little area, not even walking. He said that it wasn't even walking. It was like he was floating basically at walking speed. And he was seeing all of these different tendrils, and they were all over people's immortalized bodies. They were piercing into their heart, they were holding them, and some of their faces looked very confused, very fearful, mostly fear. But he was like, let me go into my workplace and see what it looks like. He goes into his workplace, he goes into his desk in his like little area. He doesn't see anything, he's like, okay. But he feels something in the next room. And he knows that's where one of his, I believe, coworkers or supervisors stays, and there's a tendril that's wrapped around his neck, and it's lifting him up. This guy's name, we later find out, is John Ouzel, and he was being suspended, of course, like about 2 feet from the ground. So then this is when he wakes up because he gets really distraught. So he wakes up and he's like feeling actually no discomfort when he wakes up. The dream did linger in his head. He was like, oh, I haven't seen John in a while. I hope he's doing okay. So he checked in with a few of his coworkers, and that's when he found out that John actually killed himself because he lost the battle of custody with his wife to see his children. That's the really sad part about it. So then he has the same dream, except this time as he's walking around, the tendrils are quite thicker. The faces that he saw before, the old ones at least, they started to fade, though there were some new people there as well. And of course, when he went back into his office, he saw John still there, but his face was actually kind of blank as well. But in his third dream, before he got into his third dream, he tried to like read books on like, oh, vivid dreaming, what the fuck is this, what's happening to me? But nothing was ever good enough for him to be able to move forward. So then he has his third dream, and everything relatively stays the same, except he sees his father walking down the street, and as his father is walking down the street, the tendrils are slowly creeping up his neck. Not neck, his legs. His tendrils are slowly creeping up his leg. So he sees this and he's trying to warn his father. He's like, Dad, you need to understand, like, this is not okay. Like, you need to go get checked by the doctor. He set up a doctor's appointment and everything. His father was like, no, I'm okay. The doctors couldn't see anything. He then actually ended up having a heart attack on New Year's Eve. So that was a really sad part. And then that's kind of when Antonio lost hope for it ever doing well, or him with his dreams ever being able to do good for people. He was kind of losing faith as to why he even has it in the first place. This is when we get to dream number 4, and this is when shit gets real. So he dreams back into this world again, and all of the tendrils are thicker and there's a red light inside of them, and he could have sworn that he saw people's faces, even souls, inside of those little dark web tendrils. Now, these tendrils basically covered the entirety of that part of the city, so it was hard for him to really walk anywhere in this dream. So basically, he kind of floated along it, making sure that he wasn't touching any of the tendrils and stuff. And he was following this red light because it seemed to get brighter the more that he walked. So he was walking, and it was at walking speed, but it didn't seem that long until he got to where his destination was, which was a rich white neighborhood. But in this rich white neighborhood was the Magnus Archives Institute. And that's the scary part. He walks inside the Magnus Archives Institute, and in the archives room, he sees just blood splattered everywhere, like a sticky red blood everywhere. Except he sees a chair, and he sees someone in the chair. But everything but their face is covered in these tendrils. Now, that's when he realizes that's Gertrude Robinson's face, the original archive person, before Jonathan, the main speaker of the entire podcast, actually shows up. So, this was during the time that Gertrude Robinson was the head archivist, and the person who submitted this statement was trying to warn them, and they have a specific quote, which of course I love quotes, and it says, "Be careful, something's coming for you. It's far worse than I've ever seen. You should appoint a successor." And then that's all, and that's the end of the statement. Now, of course, we get into the important notes part. So basically, this is when we find out that Jonathan Sims said that he really didn't learn very much about Gertrude and how she died. Otherwise, she died in her line of work. And of course, he had Tim look into the name Antonio Blake because he wanted to learn more about him, possibly do a follow-up. But they learned that Antonio Blake was a fake name as well. And then John believed it could have been like hazing for the new boss since everyone was there before. Like maybe people were just playing games with him. But he did tell someone else in the podcast, which hopefully we'll be able to meet later. Her name is Rose, and told her if she were to get any new archives to send it straight his way, especially if they talk about his death. So, Saraki, our lovely, lovely, lovely nurse, she's a nurse at St. Thomas Hospital, and of course she goes in as a little rant to why she didn't want to work Christmas Eve night, specifically because she didn't really want to deal with the drunks, but she didn't want to do an overnight shift, which makes sense. I wouldn't want to do an overnight shift on Christmas Eve either. It's Christmas Eve, technically, so... Around 1 a.m., there's these 2 burn victims who do come in, and they're burned nearly all over their body. And of course, the doctor looks at them first, but it seems like the doctors are talking really slowly and really quietly. And this was a bit weird for Saraki. The first man that they actually brought to the treatment unit was burned completely from face, all hair burnt off, everything, but his clothes actually remained intact, which was really weird, especially if you're that burned. They were all 2nd-degree burns, and it just seemed really, really odd as to why it was like that. And then the second victim had burn marks up until his neck, and it stopped there. He had on a tan coat. Of course, they both had on suits as well, but he had on a tan coat, and he also had a bunch of like black patches on his skin, which would later be known that those black patches are actually just small little eyes. And everywhere there was a small little eye, that area was not burned whatsoever. Now, the original story of how they got there was apparently that there was a fire over at St. Mary's courtyard, and apparently these 2 were completely burned. There was only a small little scorch mark right by them, and there was a black pipe that was bent. It looks like it was melted and bent. One of them had a lighter with them that had a black eye on it, and then the other, and also had a passport on it that said Gerard Key. And you guys should know this name already because he's come up quite a few times, and he's one of my favorite characters. So then Saraki puts them in a ward for them to rest. One of them is resting very, very peacefully. The other one starts chanting while they're resting. 2 Latin words I'm not going to try to butcher, but it means the lightless flame, or at least that's what she believes that it means from her Latin teaching classes. And they won't stop chanting whatsoever. This person will not stop chanting. It starts off very slow, but gradually it starts to get louder and a bit more faster paced as well. And then she goes over back to the emergency reception area, and no one's there. No staff, no people, no one. The only people who were in the building at this point were those who actually could not move. And so she kept re-entering to kind of see, like, oh, maybe people left to go grab something, or maybe there was something cool outside. So she kept re-entering to kind of figure out, oh, like, it'll be fine, like, everything's fine. So her third time re-entering, she hears a growling sound and an animal noise. And then she realizes that the two vending machines over in the corner are actually shaking and hissing. And so she walks over to it, which I don't know why you would do, you basic white woman. But she walks over to it and she's like, oh my God, because she realizes that a bunch of the sodas that were in there were slowly starting to hiss and boil, and they were starting to spill over. The drinks are basically boiling at this point. So then she decides, I want to leave here. Where's everyone else? She runs towards the door. Before she could touch it, she feels the heat off of it, and she sees how it's radiating off. And then this is when you hear the chanting guy from earlier. This is when you hear him chanting even louder. So she marches over into that room, and she gets ready to grab her hand and shut him up for some reason or another. But before she could do this, a hand reaches out and grabs her hand. And she realizes it's the other guy, Gerard Key. And as he's grabbing her hand, he grabs it a little too roughly, and so she screams. Jared apologizes, and he's like, I'm just trying to stop you from doing something that you're gonna regret, emphasizing him being burned quite a lot. And he was just like, believe me, you don't want to do it. Then of course, in Gerard fashion, he goes into this mode where he gets very mysterious. And so he asks her, oh, did a red leather book come with us? And she was like, no. And he was like, what about a brass pendant? And she was like, no. And he was thinking, she was thinking, well, he's probably talking about a brass pendant with an eye on it. So then he marches away from her, goes directly to the supply closet, which, sorry sir, how the fuck do you know where the supply closet is? He goes directly over there, and he goes and he grabs a tool, a scalpel that was wrapped in a cloth. And so she's standing in the doorway because she's like, oh shit, he's gonna kill him, should I stop him? And so they sit there for a little minute before she hears the chanting again, and then she sees a saline solution behind him start boiling, and then she was like, yep, nope, go kill the bitch. And he was like, let the lightless flame be with you, or something like that. So then he goes over to the man and he says a quick chant, and then he drives a scalpel into his throat, and you can hear the scalpel sizzling, and it smells like rotten flesh on a grill, as how she describes it. And that's when the scalpel itself dissolves, and then his body turns into complete ash. And then he just simply takes one of the bedspreads, and he takes a little sweeper, and he sweeps it out of the bed, and he gives it to her to dispose of. He lays back in his bed, and he goes back to bed. Which, honestly, Gerard, good for you. Good for you, I guess. You're saving the planet, I think. I don't know. And so she sits there confused for a second, but as she's leaving out and disposing of the ashes, everyone's back, from the doctor to the patients. So she runs over to the doctor and gives him a hug. And that's the end of her statement. One of the final notes before she actually ends her statement was that she was feeling watched, and she just completely ignores the storage room because she doesn't really want to go in there. She's scared of what's in there, but she just feels watched now. And so here are some important notes. So Sasha, we love Sasha, you'll hear from her later. She did get some access to some documents. She got access to the hospital record that confirms the admission of Gerard Key and an unknown man. And then they do get the missing police report, as well as Gerard's discharge papers as well. They figure out that Gerard was actually discharged to be with Mary Key, his mother, for about 4 days after he got his initial care. And then this is when he actually breaks down some of those Latin terms from earlier, and he tells us exactly how to say those Latin words and what they mean. So the first one is Ase, which is a demon in Sumerian mythology associated with disease and corruption, and it was said that he was so ugly that he could boil fish in the lake, which is crazy. Then the last one was Vipalach, which means a Polish word for branded, like you're branding something, and that's what Martin found as well. note of the fact that that Gerard, this is the second time that Gerard Key has turned up, and he did make a note that Gerard did pass away from a brain tumor in late last year. And so Saraki declined to do a follow-up interview. She said that she still feels like she's being watched. And Sasha found the footage from the hospital, and it shows all 28 people in the reception, including the staff, all getting up and walking out, which was so very, very, very odd. But that's when, in about 15 minutes, they actually end up returning. But then for a split second in the camera, you get a very small glimpse of an eye staring back at you. I hope you guys enjoyed this episode, and if you did, give me a thumbs up. If not, it's okay to tell me what I did wrong down below.